What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It, your weekly movie podcast for movies that have been rebooted, remade, sequelized, adapted, curated from something other than an original thought that a writer had in a room, that a producer then gave notes on until it fit their vision, until they attached a star who changed it again, until they tested it for audiences who changed it a third time, until it made it all the way to your home, where you then dictated how you thought it should have been on Twitter. As always, I am your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And on this week, we are doing another in a much longer list than I realized of movies that Disney has adapted based on properties in their theme park, as well as talking about the genre of that movie and why I believe that we should have more of them, but also why we probably don't and why that genre is everlasting. Of course, I am talking about Jungle Cruise and why the adventure movie genre matters. This movie has come out this weekend, again in the pandemic, again with a premium access release. Will The Rock and Emily Blunt join Scarlett Johansson suing Disney? Only time will tell.
Everyone
But
sues.
I think they got to get their money. You can't be breaking contracts. Go get paid. That's what I have to say. That's all I have to say on that. You broke your contract. Pay
I
the
agree.
actors. Do it. You have enough money.
Just do it. Yeah.
You'll be fine, Nikki. You'll be fine. Terrence, what did you think of Emily Blunt and The Rock's film?
it's it's funny. I'm a fan of Dwayne. I love his movies. They're fun. He typically has a good time. He's very charismatic. But I really had no desire to see this movie originally. I was like, sure, another Disney ride movie, whatever. I don't care. This ride itself didn't really mean that much to me from the Disneyland visits that I've had. So it's like, who cares? And after about 5 minutes into this movie, I couldn't stop smiling. I was having a ball. This was a lot of fun. And yeah, it's by the books. Like, you know what you're kind of getting. You're getting a sort of a Indiana Jones adventure, mummy-ish, very, very pirates. But I'm okay with that because what makes this work is that both Dwayne The Rock Johnson and Emily Blunt are so charismatic with each other that anything the ride that I'm going with the two of them, I'm in. Once they get together, this movie clicks and clicks on all cylinders. It just becomes a damn good time. And it's as simple as that sometimes. If the chemistry works, it works.
Yeah, I think my journey with this movie was I don't care. But that being said, I had never been to Disneyland before I saw Pirates of the Caribbean, and that first movie is still one of my favorites of all time. I have since been to Disneyland many times and have still never been on the Jungle Cruise. So here we are. I'm sure that I would love it. I'm sure it would be a great time. I just, they've got Star Wars and Marvel stuff to see now. I don't know.
It's going to be the last thing you like, oh, there's a small world, there's Star Wars, there's this, and there's a Jungle Cruise.
And now look, it's no Country Bears, the
It's
hit
just a movie
film based off of the same play.
Yeah.
But it's great. If you don't know the movie, it's swashbuckling. Dwayne Johnson is giving Caribbean cruises. Emily Blunt is on search for a flower that is going to cure every disease of mankind. It turns out that conquistadors have attempted to get this and have been met with a terrible curse, as is the style of the time. Many other genres have done this. Well, many other movies in this genre have done this. And I did end up enjoying this movie. I like The Rock mostly. I feel like it's time for him to do something other than being The Rock. And I felt like we got that here. I felt like we kind of saw a more depressed, down on his luck, I don't want to go, I don't want to do it, you shouldn't even be here kind of Rock, combined with this sort of like witty, swashbuckling, very Jungle Cruise, what I imagine the ride is. Timed traps, trained animals. It's all mastermind by him, even leading up to fun moments of him stopping a tiger attack only to discover that that is, in fact, his pet tiger that he has.
Yeah.
I really liked Emily Blunt's character, very reminiscent of the Mummy, a very just like stern. She's strong. She's smart. She's going to get what she's doing. She's not here to haggle. She's not here to get tricked. I'm
She
all
does remind
about
me a
it.
lot of Rachel Weisz's character. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
being said, I kind of wish these two characters have started to trust each other a little bit more quicker. We were doing a lot of, come on, Pants, take that, Skippy. No one touches my engine. Well, I know what I'm doing. I would never let you drive my boat. And that was my only, we can do this for 30 minutes. Then I need us all to get on the same page and be the
Yeah.
team.
And it doesn't really change until the last act. with a big twist. So it's kind of like, oh, that needed, like, we spent an hour and some change with these guys doing this. And yeah, it can get taxing or old pretty quick. I think because they are so good at it that it didn't bother me, but it can start wearing on you after a bit. Um, the ride itself, just to kind of give a little background on that, at Disneyland, it's a simple ride. It's just literally a boat ride around the jungle-esque portion that they sort of made, and they have sort of weird things sometimes popping out. It's just stuff that's not real. That they kind of like, oh, this is the snow house, or this is where
Oh, they don't
Aborigines
have a
live.
real snow house. It's all fake.
It's all fake. But the one thing that I will say that is almost a one-to-one that I kind of was like, oh, that's cute, is that the skipper or whoever your captain is the boat to a person, and they are saying some of the most corniest and wildest, just terrible things that you're like, but you're at Disneyland, so you're kind of like, it's a family affair, so this is what we're doing. So that sort of gets recreated with The Rock just having a blast, saying the cheesiest thing, sort of becomes a shtick. So that works as a one-to-one. I'm like, oh yeah, that does sort of remind me of being on that ride. Like, I'm chuckling, but that was a terrible joke, and you know it. So that brought me a little bit of joy. But for the most part, the ride is so simplistic that they kind of can do whatever they sort of want to with the film itself, which, like, none of the stuff about the flower or any of that stuff is actually a part of it. It's more so just a sort of like a lake tour around a little small area that they've kind of designed to have spots.
Which I really like. I think one of the, before we kind of get into the advantages of adapting this theme park ride, one of the other things I really did like in this movie was the practical sets. There's a lot of CGI animals and kind of goofiness, but these big sweeping landscapes and these large sets they built for these set pieces was incredible.
I
That
love
was
old sounds, like with the soundstage style stuff, and it's like super large. You know, they built this massive set to just blow up, and I was like, oh, that's fun. This movie works a lot better when it's doing the practical stuff. A lot of the time, the CGI, and especially for a film that was in the can for as long as it was, some of the CGI is still really rough. And I was like,
it
how did we spend so much time with this movie existing and you haven't fixed all of these things?
it feels like the CGI wanted to be stylized to play a bit more the way like a 2D animated Disney movie does, where they have like personalities. Like even when the tiger fights the spider, I was like, why is the spider doing like Jim Carrey hand movements? Like it's a
Yeah,
spider.
right.
Just be a spider. But that it didn't really get in the way that much. But I do think we were talking about adapting this ride. You bring up a very good point of there is no lore. You're not really going to get stuck in the same trap that I think something like Dune might get stuck in, the Indiana Jones 5 movie might get stuck in, adaptations of comic books, reboots of beloved properties, horror genres. Everybody, one, nobody owes you anything. Characters exist to service the story they're in, not the other way around. So
Right.
I don't know what to tell you. We're a Last Jedi positive podcast here. So deal with it.
I know.
But that being said, I think this puts you in a unique place where you have a ride. All you really got to get is this skipper that makes puns and the jungle. And the rest of it is kind of up to you. It feels like buying an old Lego set before they had IPs where they were just like, today, pirates, and tomorrow, knights, and on Wednesday, the moon. What will
Perfect.
happen? It's up to you.
The choice is yours.
Which is I think very freeing for a company that wants to both have the advantages of a built-in IP and property and some sense of awareness of what it is, and also want to make an original movie. You
Right.
kind of get this cute middle ground where it's like, well, we're not going to piss anyone off, but people know what the Jungle Cruise is
It's
because
got
it's
a
a giant ride at a
right.
giant
It's
theme
right.
park.
It's got a slight in because people have been to Disney. They know this ride, and then we'll just tag along the biggest star in the world today, and we'll hit some mark. One of these marks will hit because they
Yeah,
know something.
yeah, the built-in ride, giant quest, charismatic lead, some romancing the stone, some Indiana Jones, some pirates, and some the Mummy from 1999, and I'll love it. I'll sit there and I'll enjoy it. You can take all the elements from these movies that we're gonna get into and go, but
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting because like how do you stay true to a ride? And I know there are people who can probably answer that I'm very good friends with, and I'm sure that if I did that homework, I would be like, this is how you would do it. But I think all you have to do is have the fun Easter eggs. It's what Country Bears did so. It's what
No country
Pirates of the
bears.
Caribbean did so
Yeah.
well. You had these famous scenes from the ride, the dog with the key and then trying to get the dog over with the meat bone. That was the moment in the movie where even my
Hmm.
parents were like, that's it's the ride. That's
Right.
fun. Like it's more about these like Easter eggs and the environment that you're building with a ride. It would be kind of cool to either have like a brand new original ride at the park or a new movie make a new ride at the park. But we're getting all this Marvel Star Wars stuff, so that is happening. But
Yeah.
I just want an up ride, Terrence. I just want to go into a hot air balloon.
You just hold the balloon and just go up in the
Yeah,
air.
I think
Yeah,
that would
I
be
get
great. I don't know why
it.
we're still doing scenes over California when we could have the up ride.
Yeah. 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 Um, it's funny because I mean, like there was the one that I always think back to, I'm like, oh, why did they make a ride off of that? Like, I mean, Tomorrowland didn't do well. That was the Clooney one, but Haunted Mansion is the one that I always think about with these. Is it's like, that movie did everything absolutely incorrect to bring a franchise ride to, and it obviously, yes, it takes place in a mansion. You can't really get that wrong, but I think a lot of the heart of what you feel with that ride was sort of missing in that Eddie Murphy version, which is why we're probably getting a reboot.
Well,
Which is
we'll
always
see
weird that
how
we're
those
getting
contract negotiations go. That movie might be gone.
yeah, that's true.
Who knows? But no, it is true. Like they now have a much longer history of adapting these rides than I think people really realize. I think we focus so much on Pirates because that first movie is, of course, perfect.
Yeah.
But like you do contrast that with the Haunted Mansion. You go, well, how did this Eddie Murphy Disney property not spawn 30 sequels? And it's
Right.
right, like the spirit of being on the Haunted Mansion and the mystery of that ride and going through the first room and having that introduction and the room spinning
The,
around and
yeah,
you
the
go down
elevator
the
dropping.
fake elevator
Yeah,
and these
it's great.
long portraits and being, they show you a mirror with ghosts in it that are in the ride with you. It's hard to encapsulate that magic. And
Hmm.
I do think that that's actually something that both Pirates and Jungle Cruise do very well. The atmosphere of Pirates, which is my favorite ride at Disneyland and also one of my favorite movies, is, these grimy, grungy pirates and some scenes that we can get rid of now that did not make it into the Pirates movie because we
Right.
don't need them. We're also pro getting rid of those on this podcast. Other things that people get mad about for no reason. You get the dog, you get the embodiment of this adventure that these pirates went on, these piles of coins, this weird story of like, there's a human skull on the ride. One of these skulls is real. Like
Yeah.
you start kind of getting your own myth baked into this. And I think you're right. I think the Jungle Cruise movie takes those myths that you have on that ride, which is just, I want to learn about this weird fake jungle, and infuses that into the movie in a very fun way. It
Yeah.
becomes very thrilling to just be like, oh, well, what's around this turn
What's
and
a,
where are we going?
yeah. Yeah. And you don't really get movies that make characters anymore. Where like Paul Giamatti is in a movie and he's clearly having a ball. You're like, oh, that's fun. Whatever he's doing, I want more of it because he's having a damn good time. Those weird off the cuff, like, oh, we don't get to see these in these because movies nowadays are very straight edge. You're like, all right, this is what we're doing. This is what these fantasy films or these big swashbuckling type of movies. This is where you get to do the weird shit that Paul Giamatti is pulling off in this film. And I love it.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I all the characters I really liked. Now they don't have. As I was watching this, I kept comparing in my head to Pirates, and we don't have the like great character intro for Jack Sparrow. We don't have this epic hero who passes the
Yeah.
skeletons and takes off his hat, and then you cut to the boat sinking and he gets off. We
It's
don't really
weird.
build him up that way.
Right. It's weird. They sort of do that with Lily. Like Lily gets the big moment because she has the whole I'm getting the arrow and then I'm going climbing up the ladder and escaping. Like that whole getaway and then her landing in the boat or landing in the bus car before taking off is like that's the intro moment for this big scale. And that's when I was like, oh, they're giving her the big intro and then we're just going to meet Frank, which is an interesting play because everything leading up to this has led me to believe, and it's co-billing, but it has led me to believe that The Rock is the major point A of this, but this movie starts off with like first 15 minutes is all
Well,
Lily.
it's Emily Blunt's movie, and she has the
Right.
most agency in the movie. She has the
Correct.
strongest motivation. She has the clearest character arc. When we meet The Rock, he might as well just be a drunk tour guide. And
Right.
we're tiptoeing around it. We're not quite like Jack Sparrow's a drunk, and we didn't mind showing that to kids at that time. And now it's more like, I'm going to throw out all your luggage except for the
Except for
liquor
the alcohol, and
cabinet.
he has his flask that he takes a sip of. It's clear that there's some alcohol things going, but they don't. Once the alcohol bit with the luggage happens, they don't really come back to it. But yes, it's clear that he's like, I'm here. I've been
Yeah.
on this. The twist that we get is like, oh, I see why he is that way, but it's kind of like, that makes sense.
So then, before we get into the adventure genre, let's talk about this twist, because I feel like it's necessary to both say what this movie steals and doesn't steal in this genre and why it kind of is relevant. Spoiler alert, if you haven't paid the $30 or gone to the movie to spend an equal or less amount.
I saw a
uh,
family of 6 in there. I was like, guys, you could have just watched this on at home.
I did the Premier Access, that Delta
Oh,
variant,
you did?
fucking
Nice.
around. Yeah,
Nice.
no. Got off work at 6. I hit that play button at 6:30, and let me tell
How
you, it
easy is
was
this? It's
great.
one of the greatest things. Yes, it's fantastic.
It really made me wish, we're not going to talk about it too much, but I really kind of made me wish the Green Knight had the same access. I was like, I kind of wish I could just put on the Green Knight now and knock it all out.
Yeah.
Um, but we're not here to talk about that long poem. We are here, in fact, to discuss. I liked the Green Knight, but it's a long poem.
It is.
But this twist. So these conquistadors have come. They've all been cursed. We find out that he's not a Nazi, but he might as well be a Nazi. He is kind of a Nazi.
I said Prince is, yeah, he's sort of Nazi.
It's like, it's not a word. I kept kind of being like, what year is this? Because like, it's not a World War II. I think it's the end of the Spanish War.
Yeah.
But like, he's very Nazi centric.
He 100%.
So, we've got your stereotypical Indiana Jones German villain who just wants to find this flower and being the curse to further his own gains in this war, whichever one is going on. Nondescript, 16 something. Turns out Dwayne The Rock Johnson was part of these conquistadors. They had come to find this flower to save his general's daughter and do all this stuff. And then they found it, and then they were all cured of their diseases, and then they weren't allowed to take it. So they slaughtered everybody on the island. So they were then cursed because, again, that's what we do with these movies.
Yeah.
And they were told, they'll live, they'll die. They're stuck by the river unless they can't get back to that river. So then The Rock plants them after years of fighting, years of dueling, very Pirates climax if it had kept going.
100.
It really was that, like, well, what are we going to do, Jack? Two immortals battling till the end of time. You kind of had that lived out in this movie. And
Correct.
then the solution was, I'm going to put them in a pit where they can't get out. Then the jungle takes them over and creates the what I thought were very cool CGI villains that I wanted more of. This weird bee man.
They all had their
weird
own sort of
snake
style
man,
to them. Yeah, that was dope.
Very Beast Wars, Transformers. Very
Yes.
very. Let's not rip off Pirates too much. I
Yeah.
wanted more of that. That was one thing in the movie. I was like, I don't really care about this fake Nazi. I want to see more of this weird bee man and this.
Well, that's what was
man.
weird is that it was hard. This film doesn't have a definite one villain. It's like this guy's a villain and this guy's a villain, and it's weird because it sort of tries to split the time. And I'm like, Jesse Plemons' character is it seems like that's who they want us to feel like the main villain is, but he's almost too cartoony. Whereas at least the CGI folks, I feel a little bit more dread and terror when they're on the screen. So that should be the villains that we are more in line with and more afraid of. And I feel like they don't quite even that out enough or give it enough to the CGI folks. They don't really matter until the third act.
Right. And
sucks.
I really the action then could have, I think, been cooler. I was like, I really want to see what these guys can do. And it all felt very like staged Indiana. And I think that's because The Rock is massive.
It's a big man. Yeah.
So I was like, I get there, but every punch, it felt very slow. And I was like, I really want the action to be like crazy.
Yeah.
Because we've got these crazy villains that are just so cool. They're very toyetic is like the word I would use. I'm like, these are the kind of things that like I would have seen this movie when I was 12 and then driven to Toys R Us and be like, I gotta buy that fucking B guy.
I want that B guy now. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's I want that B guy now.
that is awesome. But alas, I don't. They might have Jungle Cruise toys. I don't know.
I don't know.
They certainly don't have ones that I want. But
Correct.
I thought that it was that was cool. But so it turns out that Dwayne Johnson was part of this. He's stuck them in their curse. So now he's doing these tours, which does change a lot of his agency. But where this differs in a lot of adventure movies is this is the middle of the film. And typically the reveal that magic is real is your third act, the hero has lost moment. Pirates and the Mummy are really the two exceptions to that rule. And even the Mummy kind of takes its time, but Pirates
Yeah.
from the jump, even that curse is just a legend. This is the first time that I can think of, or halfway through a movie, we just went, it's all real.
Here's the exposition. Everything is real. Here you go. You're
Yeah,
either
we're
in or
not
you're not.
messing around with it. Here we go. Then, we've got to do his self-sacrifice. And then she has to which a part of me was like, let the rock die. Take the flower and girl, there's going to be this thing called COVID later and you're going to want that flower. Like, don't just give it all to the rock right now.
Like, no. Okay, mass produce that. What are you doing? Come back and get him later. It's fine.
The pharmaceutical industry is going to ruin us. The cost of insulin is going to be way too high. Medicare is going to be trash.
You
the
barely
American
know this
healthcare
guy.
system,
You haven't even kissed this man yet. You gave some water breaths a
Oh,
little bit,
you
but
have
that's it.
no idea how hard it's going to be to just go to a doctor in 100 years. You keep that medicine flower. Oh my God. I was so like, don't you do it. Don't you do it. You have no idea how bad it's going to get. It should have been easy. We all should have gotten our vaccines and worn our masks, and you will be amazed how many people won't, Emily Blunt.
Well, I feel like this movie took place in 1960, so World War One. Dysentery, like all the stuff that Oregon Trail goes through, we haven't even gone through that yet. Keep that damn flower.
Oh my God. Do you know how expensive it's going to be for some people to go to the dentist? And how hard capitalism is going to make this impossible. Keep your flower.
Yeah, that was the one thing that I was sitting there like, I don't know if
we can find another star for the sequel.
I was like, we can get another one. What's John
Jason
Cena doing
Statham
right now?
is available.
The look that they had a conversation before he went down there. It's like, look, she's like, you can come do this with me. You can come do this. Like, no, I don't want any of that. I just want to die.
No, I'm good. I don't need to learn how to drive a car or something.
I don't want any of that.
But yeah, it's interesting because I feel like that's one of the big differentiations in the rest of this genre, which brings us to I think is a beloved genre. And I'm proven by that because once a week on my Twitter, the Mummy trends, Pirates trends, or Indiana Jones trends, or Uncharted trends, or Tomb Raider in a rarer instance. Although I do like the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider movies quite a bit, and those games are fantastic.
Correct.
Terrence, why do you think, as far back as Romancing the Stone and even further beyond, why does this genre, which, if I may be blunt, is pretty simple, which is just a character going after a rock, in this case, the literal rock.
The actual,
Why do we love it so?
There is something fun. It's very old school. Like even, I mean, obviously I'm not that old, but like just the old school of just like these radio plays that people used to do, where like you would listen to the swashbuckling tale. It's the bare bones of stories. Where like you get a good guy, you get a bad guy. The good guy's chasing to get something from the bad guy, or the bad guy and the good guy are chasing something together, and then calamity ensues. And it's just the essence of what tells a good story. Zorro is in that category. Like all of these big swashbuckling tales, where you're like, I just want to see them go on the highest scales or the lowest scales and just kind of like just go for Bond. While it's not the same thing, Bond sort of fits into that big scale type of like where we're doing these swashbuckling, these all types of adrenaline adventures. And obviously at the end of the day, you know what's going to happen. The good guy, they win. But it's the joy of seeing it done well. And that's why I say, yes, it's very by the books. It does know it's a point A to point B to point C story. But if you have good characters that people like fall in love with, then the ride just becomes fun. At that point, you're like, I know what I'm getting. This is comfort food to me. I know what I'm getting. But if I like these people, I can invest. And I'm like, cool, sit back. I know what we're doing, but I'm here for it. Let me see every piece of this.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on something that we see in modern filmmaking. The spy movie with James Bond, the adventure movie with Indiana Jones, and the old westerns were in many ways our superhero movies before everybody wore spandex and we made fun television shows using old sitcoms. And I think it was sort of that everyman approach. Give us a larger than life character, whether that represented the idyllic, maybe now problematic, but a man's man and James Bond and
Right.
a strong, it belongs in a museum. This resolve of these characters to always do the right thing and to always persevere. And I think the adventure genre specifically lended itself to this larger than life, grand globe trotting adventure where every other scene was like you had Indiana Jones was always, we got to fight the Nazis, but we've got to go to at least 2 countries to do it, which means we're going to see all of these unique places and
Massive.
people
Yeah.
and societies and swords and guns and explosions. And this was the tentpole filmmaking before we got to space and we put on masks.
Right.
And I think that it's something that now we kind of like, the math of it really isn't there anymore. Because when you look at like the superhero movie, it is much more internal and external. It's the Spider-Man coming to terms with the power he has. Iron Man coming to terms with, selling weapons was bad, and I'm seeing the consequences, and now I have to go do this. The adventurer always knew what was
Typically
right.
knows. Right. Exactly.
There was always a like, it belongs to them. It doesn't even, like, I think now really maybe even some of them before Indiana Jones is like, maybe it doesn't belong in a museum. Maybe it belongs to that country of origin. Maybe Indiana Jones doesn't need to take but then, he comes to that. He sees the Ark of
Right.
the Covenant and goes, no one can open. We cannot know this. And there's always a fun, like a sense of belief that I think is in there, because almost all of these movies have a ancient religious idea behind it of like, do you believe in curse stories? You best start believing in ghost stories. And then they always dance into that horror space, the face melting off in Indiana Jones, the drinking the wine and pirates and it dripping down his
this one is still one of the best
bones,
shots ever.
the
Yeah.
Beatles in the Mummy. Oh, these are the things. And it kept that family going alive, but it had these like, ooh,
Yeah.
these moments that you don't really get in Iron Man. There is no horror in Spider-Man.
No.
There is no horror. Well, there's some in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man.
But it's true.
Like,
yeah.
But like, these are the things, like they go to find the unknown and they find it. Like there's always something kind of about that, because I think in horror, in superheroes, in mysteries, in thrillers, we are kind of set to believe already. We're going into a horror movie, we know there's a ghost. We sit down with superhero movies, we know that the X-Men have powers. We sit down with Knives Out, well, we know there's a solution to this.
But with these type of films, you're sitting there like, will they? Oh shit, they did it!
There's something fun, because we all have myths, we all have stories, and like there's something fun in that first Pirates movie when he's like, the Black Pearl, so you've seen a ship with black sails so dark that even the night would. I've seen a ship with black sails, and so any ship with black sails that is at night must be. Like they even debate the myth in the movie.
I say what makes that work is because they're debating it, and at that point, Sparrow just seems like a walking drunk, like he's a walking alcoholic. So you're like, I don't know if I can believe him. And then when it happens, you're like, oh, he knows.
And they debate it in horror movies as well, right? But the difference is that like The Conjuring 3, we talked about being weird because we as an audience have seen an exorcism, and now we have to watch them convince people that exorcisms are real. But in the first Pirates and in Jungle Cruise and in Indiana Jones, it always kind of starts off being like, audience, here's a story. It's probably not real though, right? And so there is always like a very weird possibility that like the Curse of the Black Pearl could just be, the boat might have just sank.
Right.
And I think that's why the second, third, and fourth and fifth Pirates movies aren't quite as fun,
Because
because
you're
like
already in it.
we know the Kraken's coming.
Yeah. You're
So
already
then
in it.
you have the scenes I hate in horror movies where they're like, "Is Mike Myers really out there?" And you're like, he has killed 5
Absolutely.
people.
He has murdered everyone.
Like, oh my god. But there's something, and these swashbuckling, larger than life characters who would just know everything, and I think that's what endures in this movie is you are sort of like, man, we're at the jungle and we just don't know. And Emily Blunt is just so suave and fun in that intro, and even The Rock's making these corny jokes, and it just puts a smile on
And
your
it's
face.
something so simple and it's so beat by beat. It follows the rules, but there's a scene in here where they're swinging and he tries to swing. He puts his foot down and he's missing, and he's like, I got it, and I don't have it, and they kind of lose it. It's pitch perfect. It's fantastic. And I was like, oh God, this is what I need. I love all of this. This is
Well,
great.
those are always the best moments, because in all of these, what they have is Jack Sparrow, Indiana Jones, Romancing the Stone, The Rock are also characters that are like, I got it.
Yeah, I'm good. I got
I don't
this.
got it. I don't
Nope,
got
I was wrong.
it.
I graciously misjudged this.
And I think there's always something fun. And that's what like the spy movies don't do. Like James Bond always has it.
He
There's
always
never
has it.
a moment where James is like, whoa,
Oh,
no, he's got it.
correct.
I think that's where like, because then, thematically, even when we talk about like, well, why are we doing this, or why are we here, and does it matter to a modern audience? And I'm like, well, this is kind of just another movie of like, love is nice, and like they're even, Indiana Jones is always like, well, it belongs in a museum, but we have to stop the bad guy from getting it, and if the bad guy gets it, it's bad. And
Mhm.
pirates is all these movies usually deal with the ideas of immortality, the idea of absolute power, and like, what would you do with that power? And it's usually about being like, you don't want it. Like the fun part of Jack Sparrow was like, I kind of want it.
Which is sort of fascinating in this one is that, I mean, we find out that the Rock's Frank is immortal, or he has been around for a while, and he's sort of to get at the end, he gives up his immortality, although it wasn't really his choice, but his immortality is given up for him, and he's now regular, which is kind of like, oh, that's a sort of a flip on the norm of what we kind of have to go through at the end of those.
No, I think usually those themes are like, you make what you have with the time you've got. We don't need to
Right.
be doing this. What made Pirates so interesting, where the villain's agency was like, we gotta undo this.
Yeah.
Like we've been too long. Have I drank wine and not tasted it too long? Like it, that movie. So let's just talk about Pirates One. uh, but so do you think Jungle Cruise then? Because like it did fine, 30 million in a pandemic, 30 million more on Disney Plus. These aren't great numbers, but
Mm-mm.
we're playing in a different ball game
It's I say
now.
though the world is very different right now, especially now with the Delta stuff coming up. You're gonna have half the audience saying, "I'm not going back to a theater because of this," and the other half like, "I'm not wearing a mask going back to the theater." So it's a lot of people just not going to a theater right now, understandably.
So does this movie do enough to set itself apart from the other things in the genre? Did we need to do this, or we got to make sure that ride's still relevant because Anaheim's got to eat.
That mouse is not feeding enough. He's broke. He's having a hard time right now. If I'm being perfectly honest, no, this movie does not need to exist. Like, there's no reason really for a Jungle Cruise to be around, and it's like not even a top tier ride at the park. So it's not like it's set up for a ride that was doing well. Now this might bring more attention to it, but even still, it's such a small ride and it's not even a small world. Like, it's a small world. It's actually a longer and bigger ride and attraction than this. So that's where this gets super bizarre. This feels like this was a vehicle because I know his entire production company is on it. The Rock wanted to do something with Disney, and I think that's what pretty much got the ball rolling on this. And if the Rock's team, currently the Rock is probably the only star that can kind of like, if he puts his name on it, it's probably going to get greenlit quickly, and he can bring in at the very least, he's bringing in $20 million, like just off of his name being on it, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's quite a bit of still a big number off of just the star power alone. Now you start putting in IP, sure. I don't think Disney is going to be cranking out a lot of Disney rides based off of this budget. I mean, off of what this box office is. Like this didn't break open enough where we're like, cool, we got this one doing. We're gonna do Space War, like we're gonna do all like that. That's not happening. But I think does show you that there is, if you pair things together, you might get an audience. I think this, in a normal world, this would have made like a $55 million opening in the theater. It won't have legs because
nothing has legs right now.
It's getting,
Space Jam and
everything's
Black
getting eaten
Widow
up
are
so quick.
already, yeah.
Yeah. Like, and then Suicide Squad comes, like we have stuff on the tails of everything so quickly now because of just how everything jammed in there. I don't know how this, there's no way to track this anymore. Disney Plus gives us first week numbers for stuff that they give a damn about, but
yeah, where were those Cruella numbers?
Right. Yeah. It seems like they pick and choose where they want these numbers.
Do you not think that it's even kind of worth having this out there as a lapsed genre? We haven't really gotten anything like The Mummy or Pirates in a long time. I know Uncharted and Indiana Jones are around the corner.
They say Uncharted is on around the corner, which is a great, if no one's ever played those games, if you want that feeling, those games do it. Tomb Raider 2. I think there's an audience. I think there's a audience for this. I love these type of movies. They come around so rarely. So when I get to see it, I'm like, that's what I'm missing. This harkens back to old Hollywood, but I don't know if the audiences today, I don't know if they give a shit.
My Twitter will disagree with you because everybody, when this came out, was just like, I miss The Mummy, I miss Pirates, I miss Indiana Jones.
All right, well, then
we're back in the saddle, which is how I felt because I've been sitting here, you'd think I'm the PR guy for Pirates of the Caribbean, but we can't not talk about The Mummy also. We can't not talk about Indiana Jones. And when you start looking at then does this movie do enough to set itself apart? I agree with you. Not really. Yeah. We are borrowing their relationship. Emily Blunt and The Rock's relationship in this movie is very reminiscent of the relationship we get in The Mummy. We get a lot of the same kind of give or take. These two kind of flirty, but they don't trust each other characters. They both think that they're right. They're not really listening. That's very similar. We talked a lot about the curse being similar to the Pirates. The chemistry is right out of The Mummy. Some of these villain kind of CGI vibes, even sort of Emily Blunt has the key around her neck. This is the same way that we started the quest in The Mummy. She already had the solution. We didn't have to do an Indiana Jones style, we got to get the solution, then we got to get back to it. We're not racing to the key. The key is already baked into the story. So we're already there. We have these kind of larger than life animal type characters that The Mummy also had very heavily. We've got, he is Jack Sparrow meets Brendan Fraser. He's got the same kind of smirky attitude. I think what made Pirates stand out when it came back was that Jack Sparrow was not an amalgamation of characters we had seen before. We had not really ever gotten a drunk, I don't care, I'm on your team, I'm on their team, I'm on my team. You never really know where I'm going. Chaotic character like that. I, to this day, watch these movies and I'm like, I don't know that he always would do the right thing. But, Dwayne Johnson and Brendan Fraser.
I think sometimes just the chance or the way that the tide is going is what made him go good. I think if it was switched, he would have gone bad. There's a really gray area with Captain Jack, which I think is what works. And it seems like they tried that a little bit with Frank, being him all right, I'm always doing these tricks and setups, but at the end of it, you can still say no, Frank's still just a good person.
But he was also stuck there. Jack Sparrow was allowed to, he wasn't part, he was exiled before the curse. He wanted the curse. He wanted the goal. He wanted to live forever. And then, I think Brendan Fraser and The Rock's agency are also very different, but the way these characters do it is very similar. And even these big practical sweeping sets are very similar to The Mummy and to The Rock. And all of this goes back to Romancing the Stone and Indiana Jones. I mean, we literally have a map with a red arrow in this movie. We can't get away from it.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because as much as I miss this genre, the simplicity of it does get put into Guardians of the Galaxy. We've got a very Indiana Jones setup of him. How am I going to get this power stone out? These things kind of come into other movies in these ways, but I like that we have it. And I like that the response has been give me more. because I am always like the same way I am with like a good heist. Or I'm like, yeah, we don't really get the team together anymore. Like,
Those Ocean's
show me
films were
more.
fun, but we don't do them enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, come on, like just give me a map, a place to go, and a curse. Now, what this movie didn't have that all the other ones have is that horror element, you know. We talked about the face melting off. We
You get it a
talked
little. I think they hint at it a little bit with the snakes and like you cut open, which I think is a dope trick. With you cut his face and the snake comes out of it. I was like, oh, that's fun. But yeah, you're right. There's not a really horrific element that's
and it's
added
not as tangible.
because it's so CG.
It
Yeah,
it's so well, and you know what? Even less so the CGI, because I kept kind of I can't quite put my finger on it. And there's something that these Disney movies are doing, and a lot of modern movies are doing, where I'm like, is it because it's so bright? It doesn't feel like Indiana Jones, Pirates, The Mummy. It feels very lived in and dark and dingy and grungy. And there was just something like this felt like it was clean.
it was very clean. Yeah,
And I was like, I think that also we also made the like scary people funny, where like Pirates and Indiana Jones and The Mummy have a like comic relief character, but there's
but
still
the
somebody
others
scary.
is still scary-ish. Yeah,
And I was like, the people that I'm supposed to be afraid of are also like doing bits. So like I'm not that afraid of them.
right.
And I didn't really get to see them do enough to really be like, whoa.
Well, that's the thing. I say I don't think they did enough things, anything that was terrifying enough. Where I'm like, oh, that is clearly the villain. This is why I kind of got confused. Was like, I don't know if Jesse Plemons' character or if these other characters are the true villain, because neither of them. I mean, truthfully, Jesse Plemons' character does more things that are and put the characters in peril, like throwing a missile at them or shooting missiles at them, is more terrifying than a lot of the things that happen in the back end with the monsters, if you will.
Yeah. So you know, I think clearly the adventure genre is important and it matters. I think the reason why is just like it's a good time.
Look, it's one of those easy type of movies where you can take your, like, I saw entire families, even though it was a few people in the theater, the few people that were there, it was like a family of six. They took all their kids. It was grandma was in there, the two parents, and then their kids. It's an entire experience that you can take from top of the family to the bottom of the family and just like sit down and have a good time. And a lot of these movies that we see, like horror movies, you're not getting grandma to go to see that. Like there's some times where the cutoff, you're losing parts of your audience. These type of movies, you got the entire audience, the entire family you can put in there, and it's very rare that you get a movie like that these days.
Yeah, this is true. I think it's very good. I do think the one thing that's kind of a bummer to me, and Disney just keeps doing this, uh, their LGBTQIA representation once again was like, we've got it,
And I don't know how
and we
about
don't.
you. We have it, and I don't know about you. And it's funny, but it's a weird thing that you have bits in your film that actively are poking fun or joking at the one minority person or one not active
Well,
group member's
it's
expense. Like it
it's
just feels weird.
it's Emily Blunt's. Uh, I don't even know their
Brother,
relationship.
their
Brother,
brother.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
brothers, and I don't even really remember a big scene where he comes out when they're having drinks at the bar.
And I love in that sequence, I love Frank's response to that. Because he gets it and he's like, oh, all right, cool. And he kind of and I felt like, oh, cool. If we leave it at that, I'm golden. Like this is great. I love it. It's very simplistic. But then it comes back and there's a little trifecta in the
Yeah, I'm like,
comedy world,
once
comedy of
again,
threes.
we've kind of like pushed it to the background. It's one scene that's easy to lift out if you have regions that you're going to release your movie in where that's not okay. And I'm like, I really kind of want to see them like go above and beyond with it. Like a part of me was like, it's going to be The Rock and him that get together. It's not going to be Emily Blunt and The Rock. Because I just didn't really even buy Emily Blunt and The Rock together. I liked their chemistry, but when they were like, they're romantic, I was like, I don't think I got that vibe.
Well, nothing came from it that nothing happened before that led me to believe that was the case. Like, it was him even looking at her or whatnot. It was more him in awe of her having the pendant, not of her. Yeah, she's a beautiful woman, but that's not what he was looking at. He was looking at the pendant. So it's just like, I don't really feel that this is where we're going. Yes, that would have been a better play, I think, if he hit on him, because it just felt very cheap to have this joke of like, I won't ruin it because it's not really even that funny, but there's a joke that's just like, Sure. I
Yeah.
mean, you're going for the lowest common denominator here. I guess that's
I mean,
funny.
yeah. So that was kind of my one thing where I was like, oh, we're like doing it. We're not just gonna say it. We're gonna do it. And then they were like, I was like, oh, we're just gonna okay. Sure.
Yeah,
Like I liked the ending when he told everybody to kick rocks. I thought
it's
that was
great.
great.
It's great. And
I'm
overall, I like that
always
character as a whole. And it was clear to me that he was um on the LGBTQ spectrum.
oh
I
yeah.
just didn't need, and I love the reveal. I just didn't need the butt of a joke. If you lift that joke sequence out, it's pitch perfect. I think you would have nailed it.
I was very much like, it's okay. It's better than the Rise of Skywalker. We're making strides.
Yeah, we're heading into the right direction. Yes.
So it's there, I guess. But overall, liked the movie. Do we need another one? I truly don't think we do. I feel like
I
I
think this
liked
is
this and I
fine
could
as a
walk away.
yes, I think this is fine as a one-off. I don't need to see this because I think when you get into if you start doing sequels, you sort of get into the Pirates too of it all, where you're like, we've been to this world, you've explained all the rules, and now you're breaking. Now, the one thing that they will have in their advantage is that the Rock is human and can be harmed, so that gives a little bit more peril. But you're not gonna. It's the Rock. You're not gonna kill that guy.
I don't know. I feel like there's nothing to happen to these two characters other than them watching diseases run rampant and then be like, you know, we could have
Mass produce this
yeah,
flower.
don't let's not bring it up. Like, oh, I was so. I mean, we always like we can't have it. Like, if you put that in the world, they're like, well, this. I would have been more interested in a sequel had The Rock done the self-sacrifice, and I was like, oh, we're gonna give Emily Blunt a franchise, and just she could keep going on adventures. But
Yeah,
like that's kind of the thing about these movies that this one didn't really do is like the Indiana Jones and Pirates always kind of had a like now what that I liked. Like even the first Pirates had bring me the horizon and he's got this compass that we don't really know what it does, but we know it does something. And then that's in like the sequels and the
right.
Mummy also had this like, well, we're not done yet and all of the Indiana Jones always has this like, well, now what? Or like, and I get it. I always like a movie should be self-contained, but I'm also a sucker for like we did this adventure and then the phone rings.
Breadcrumbs. Yeah.
Like we've never, for the most part, made a movie and then been like, never gonna be a sequel. Like even the
We're done
first Star
here.
Wars was like, where did Darth Vader go?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
there's usually some type of a note put in towards the tail end.
yeah, where you're like, ooh,
Yeah.
phone rang. We've got your next mission, Bond. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Then in the credits, they say he'll return. And I'm like, oh, man.
Like, yes.
There's always, this didn't have that. They just drive around
Yeah.
in that car. And I was like, all right, that's kind of an anticlimactic ending. But great. I loved it. Did well. I really hope that Emily Blunt joins Scarlett Johansson and sues Disney for more money because
I'm interested to see how this works. I'd imagine that both of them, especially Dwayne, probably had a lot of kickers as a producer and whatnot. That like, if these numbers aren't going to hit where I need them to hit, do we have a conversation? And if Dwayne gets into that mix, then Disney has to start listening because they're like, okay, we can't just poo-poo this guy.
yeah,
Away.
we didn't throw him off a cliff in Endgame. So yeah, they really, I mean, like we're wrapping up the show, but they really did that actress and that character dirty this whole time. And I'm just like, go get it.
Yeah, I'm
Go
all
get
in
it.
her camp. I'm like, you put out one of the better like even if you didn't, but you put out one of the better films. You put out a great product, and in this world, they've done this where your film is getting half the residuals here, half the residuals there, and you're kind of just like, hey guys, I still need the money that was going to be given to me had this been normal, and you chose to do this without talking about renegotiating any of my contract. That ain't gonna work for me. Good for you, Scarlett.
It should have been Clint. Well, that's our show, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed speaking into these microphones from two different cities. You can, of course, follow the show on YouTube at youtube.com/Hollywood Already Did It and watch Terrence's Ghostbusters reaction as well as other trailer and movie reviews there. You can then keep following the show for more of our Marvel Pair Up series. Soon it will be What If, along with the history of Marvel movies that aren't in the MCU. And I promise you, in a week and a half, I'll have thought of a simpler way for that to roll off the tongue. I probably won't.
No.
There's sometimes we'll get back to it also. Season 2 of You Can't Do That. What do we call it? Can't do that anymore. We
Can't do
do a
that
show.
anymore.
That's it. Thank you. About movies that might be problematic nowadays that used to be popular that you couldn't make anymore. And next week is Suicide Squad, and I think we're really back in the saddle of movies. So leave us a review on the podcast. Leave us a comment of what you thought of the Jungle Cruise and the adventure movies that you have near and dear to your heart. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of The Mummy. People love The Mummy. I love The Mummy, but I like pirates more. You can then follow me at As Always Blake and Terrence at Terrence Tatum, and that is our show. We will see everybody next week for Suicide Squad.